Hello, everyone. This is K. Enamul Haq from Bangladesh. And this month, again, Phil and I are talking about the East-West. And this time, we are going to talk about economics learning in the universities and how do we see this. I have Philip Shah, my friend from Canada. We studied together. And as we were studying, we had always questions, and he is more of a practical person. Not only he does studies, he also does his own farming. So he always had questions about the way we are taught economics in the classroom. So let us hear from Philip Shah.
Thanks, Enamul. I am Philip Shah from Dresden, Ontario, coming to you today and from this side of the world. And, you know, I began thinking about this a little earlier because Enamul had invited me to a retirement party for Dr. Glenn Fox at the University of Guelph. He was Dr. Haq's supervisor for his master's and PhD. And in it, Dr. Fox talked about how some of the greatest things teaching that he can do is teach economic theory to first-year students. And I thought it was incredibly interesting. And he talked about if he could bestow upon people the economic way of thinking on younger people, that it would do more for the greater social good than almost anything that they could teach them. And it really hit a chord for me because I farm for a living, among other things, but I also do a lot of writing on commodity marketing and a lot of speaking in Eastern Canada. And I have a very basic foundation in economics. Well, of course, we had 2 or 3 degrees in economics. I guess Enamul's got 3 degrees in economics, and I've got 2. About what that really means, about the foundational building blocks of economics and how that affects us in our daily lives, knowing how prices works and markets work and how it, you could argue that economics is the management of scarcity or things like that. I know Dr. Haq talked about, one of our colleagues says that economists are the advocates of efficiency. In any case, there's a basis for the economic way of thinking. And just with Dr. Haq and I, it's just a default. That's what we think about all the time. We see a problem, we think about the economics behind it. When we see a car going by, sometimes we think about the economics behind it. I know that I talk about agricultural economics a lot to different groups across Eastern Canada and the United States, and I do a lot of writing. And, you know, I have a I have the basics built within me, this economic way of thinking, that this is just the way the world works. And about taking resources and being efficient with resources and being the advocates of efficiency. It's not the only way to think, definitely not the only way to think, but it is one way to think that it helps people understand the way the world works. And I know, for instance, it causes a lot of confusion too. Like, for instance, when I'm trying to explain an agricultural economic phenomena to a group of farmers or a group of agribusiness people on this side of the world, everybody's coming from a different perspective of what they think. And some of them don't have any background in the economic way of thinking about things. They might be thinking about it from a totally different way. Nothing particularly wrong with that. It's just another way of thinking about things. But the economic way of thinking is, I find it incredibly useful, and it would be a kind of a standard things that everybody would need, and especially if you could relate it to practical things. The economic way of thinking, in my mind, is not only really helpful to me as an agricultural economist, but also to me as a farmer. But surely I know that Dr. Haq, he teaches first-year students and he teaches graduate students. He teaches a lot of students, and I'm sure he could concur that if he could get them to relate to the economic way of thinking, whether that's in rural Bangladesh or urban Bangladesh or different parts of Asia or different parts of wherever, it would help us, it would help the greater social good. And I think it's very important. So I'll turn it over to you, Enamul, and you can talk about this in the same type of realm.
Thank you, Phil. No, I think when we were listening to Glenn, and I like the way he posed, and Glenn was my supervisor, and I learned a lot from him. And one of the things that struck both of us is that his idea that we study economics to not to memorize anything, but to think the way it works. And what is economic way of thinking? So I give you an example that you probably told me and that you don't remember, which is I still remember the day I met you. And I asked you that, what do you do? And you said farming. And coming from Bangladesh, I never thought that a person who is studying economics at the graduate level would be actually going back to farming. I remember asking you the same question again. Are you going back to farming? You said yes. And I think probably you may have forgotten that was in your mind. So a year later, you invited me to your farm. And when we were driving into your farm, you were showing me different farms across the book in your field around, and you were telling me that because I'm an economist, I think differently than others, and because the way I'm educated, I can decisions better. So to me, that is what should be. So when we teach economics, that is one way to relate it to the ground level, to see how you can make your life decision better, more efficient, and that is something to learn. So problem that happens in economics as a science nowadays, we make abstracts. And on that, I give you another example. I still remember that you and I were discussing, and one day you came to me in my room and asked for a coffee. And then I was saying, give me a few minutes. And then you obviously was curious and said, what are you studying? And I said, I'm studying general equilibrium. And that was a difficult topic, mathematical topic in economics. For some reason, you were curious. You said, let me see. So we started the first sentence and you started laughing. I said, what is you laughing for? And your point was that, well, you started your general equilibrium with 2-person, 2 production, 2 input. Doesn't look like general equilibrium to me. I still remember this. And I still remember that actually gave me an idea that the way we present things, obviously we make abstraction from reality. We want to create a model that will be able to be expanded. The problem is that when we teach economics, we never allow our students to expand it. We rather limit them to this 2-factor, 2 production theories and try to push them more into the books rather than from the field, from the surrounding. And that is what probably missing. And from the glance discussion, I understood that it is not only missing in Bangladesh, but it is missing everywhere in the economics curriculum. And I think that is something needs to be changed. And it's a very important issue that when we're talking economics, we're not talking something that is out of the world. We're talking about efficient utilization of resources around us. And that is something that we should be thinking about. And the last example I gave also related to you. I still remember that we were talking about production function, and you said at what stage? And I said stage 2 is the most efficient. And you started laughing at it. He said, I'm in the 4th stage. So I'm giving you the point that you read the textbooks and you read economics lectures or study economics. If you don't find it relevant with what we are studying, what is happening around us, that study has no real value to me, because economics is an earthly science. It's a science that deals with people's life, matters on earth, not in heaven, because it deals with scarcity. And scarcity only on the earth, not in the heaven. So if that is an earthly science, and then we cannot explain things happening around us, that study is actually misuse of time. And I agree with the concept that we should let people think about the economic way of thinking. Means, how do you decide? How do you make your decision efficient? How do you make decisions that will increase human welfare? And that is something more important.
Yeah, like it's all around us. Like, for instance, if you have if you have an economic way of thinking, like I've traveled all over Bangladesh, right? I remember a time that you and I got into a little fender bender and we had to go get the car fixed. And I said, well, where are you going to go? And you said, well, I know a place to go. And long story short, we drove to a place in Dhaka that was where these young kids came out and they asked, they were going to fix the car for us. It was part of the informal economy. They were part of the informal economy, which is very real in a place like Bangladesh and other nations in Asia and Africa and places like that. We got our car fixed, where they took other odd parts and they morphed them into parts to replace. But the bottom line from my perspective is the economic way of thinking. For me, I was in this place looking at these two young kids fixing our car, and I knew why they were doing it. They were doing it because they fit into the economic model that was there to do that. And everybody knew that that was a place to get their car fixed in the informal economy. And the whole infrastructure had been built into that. Now, if you had questioned those kids about the economic way of thinking, I'm sure they wouldn't have known what that was. But they did know that there was a need. They did know that there was a need, and they were trying to satisfy that need. And that's just one example. You can go all through rural Bangladesh or any city in Bangladesh or back here in Canada, and you have the same type of thing taking place. But if you could get people to understand that more, even at an organic level, it would make the world easier. And there'd be a greater social good, I think, from it.
No, I think you are right that when we were thinking in this particular perspective, the economic way of thinking, I think when you look into that car example, the mechanics example, if you have noticed, if I still remember, there were a few other mechanics around it. They are competing, and the question is why the competitive markets are located in one place, because all the car fixing people are in one place. So you can see how the market is designed. And if you cannot explain this phenomenon, that is basically is in a way, I think it's a wastage of energy for people to study the science of economics, and then you cannot explain and cannot do things better for the economy, for the country. A lot of time we talk about, in Bangladesh in particular, we talk about poverty, and poverty is an issue, and a lot of time we try to find an answer, more of a socialist answer rather than from an economic logical answer, that this is another way of doing it. So if you do not use this economic argument the way I see, that you end up creating more problem than solving it. Best example probably in today's world in COVID, which is how do you organize human behavior? Because when you ask people to wear the mask, it is impossible in Bangladesh to, government has so far failed to let the people ask wear the mask when they are moving around. So when they have failed, a lot of people say to us, to everyone, that this will not work. But then we gave the example that in Bangladesh, people never used to wear helmet when they were riding on a bike. But if you look into right now in Bangladesh, all government says the people who are wearing helmet, not wearing helmet, will not be able to buy petrol from the petrol stations.
Okay.
And that's one rule completely changed it. So I'm giving you the idea that is actually economic way of thinking. Idea of giving incentive and punishment in order to change human behavior. And probably that should be one of our guiding force on teaching economics.
Yes. And the other thing is too, like I remember one time I saw you writing something down and I said, what are you doing? And you said you were figuring out a slope for an elasticity curve or something like that. But the point of it is, if you can explain economics intuitively, if you can explain it intuitively and take that intuition into the economic way of thinking, it's incredibly valuable. And I know you do this in your teaching. I know you do this with real world examples. And I try to do it in the agricultural economic world. But if you can be an intuitive economist, and explain it so people understand it, it becomes an incredibly valuable thing. And if we could teach those things to younger people, like Dr. Fox said, I mean, it's an incredible, valuable thing, and it would be a net positive to society over a period of time.
Thank you, Phil. I think I like your last phrasing, which is intuitive economist. Maybe that is what we should do and what we should teach.
Well, I think you already do it, but it is one way of looking at it if you can explain it. And I know you do it all the time, whether you knew it or not. So, well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure talking about this month on East West.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil. See you next month.
Please subscribe to this channel to receive updates on new videos.